Witch in Charm's Way, a cozy mystery audiobook, written and narrated by R.K. Dreaming. Part 4. Chapter 3. The Special Agent and the Werewolf. "What the heck are you doing here?" The moment I said it again, I groaned. Trust me to say something like that to him twice in a row. And he was looking at me with the same look of mild dislike with which he had eyed me up the first time. I had called for the police immediately, of course, after finding Lily. Well, almost immediately. First, I had considered hiding the body, carting it off to somewhere else that was not on my property, because heavens knew that I hardly needed a dead body to add to my woes. In the end, I had decided to do the right thing. Captain Villain had looked at me with disgust, as if to say it was most definitely not the right thing. But I had done it anyway, and now I was regretting it. Sort of. Because the cop who turned up at my door was none other than America's beloved Captain Shield himself, Mr. Chris Constantine. Only he wasn't a cop, because the local police station was really just a front. Humble police did not work there. Instead, we had watch witches and wizards from the Conclave of Magic, and officers from the Eldritch Council's Department of Eldritch Law Enforcement. In this case, I had expected to be sent a watch witch or wizard, since the deceased was a witch herself. I had thought perhaps even Chief Gulliver Rain himself might come. Gulliver Rain was the chief inspector of the Brimstone Bay Watch. Chief Rain knew our family well, and I had planned to make a special request for him to not tell everyone I was back, if he possibly could. Instead, I had been sent no watch witch and no Chief Rain either. Standing at my door was Special Agent Chris Constantine, or so he had introduced himself as to me. I'd never heard of a special agent in Brimstone Bay before. Instead of asking him what that meant, I had demanded to know what the heck he was doing here. He darned well knew what I meant, and therefore his response could only have been meant to goad me. "Madam, you called regarding a body? Is that right?" Madam, indeed. I was a year younger than him. I knew because I had Googled it. He was 38, a very nice 38 that filled out its trousers quite perfectly. So he was keen on not answering my question, was he? Two could play at that game. Without a word, I marched him through the castle towards the private family garden where I had found her. I paused in the garden doorway, not wanting to go out. The early dawn sun was beginning to light up the sky. The day looked like it was going to be too bright for my liking. And wouldn't you know it, I was finally beginning to feel tired. My eyelids were drooping. I needed to top up my sunblock, and fast. Not to mention changing out of the lurid pink old gown that Aunt Adele had lent me. When I had put it on, I had no idea that stupidly handsome Mr. High and Mighty was going to pay me a visit, of course. Refusing to step out, I pointed him to where the body was and turned to go back inside the castle. "Where are you going?" he asked sharply. "To spend a penny," I told him. "Is that okay, or do you need to supervise?" He had the grace to flush ever so slightly. I must have dragged him out of bed because he looked kind of sleepy. It was adorable. "Be quick about it," he told me, ruining the effect. "I'll need to ask you some questions." No, questions? I would never have guessed. My sarcasm was wasted on him. He didn't even scowl. I hurried off up to my tower to wash my face and slather on piles of sunblock. I was using up half a bottle a day at this point, and it wasn't like I could waltz into a pharmacy here and keep buying the stuff without someone getting suspicious. I put on my one change of clothing, a fresh pair of black leggings and a pale green tunic, which had been an old favourite. It didn't look so great on me now, it was too baggy. On my return downstairs, I discovered Special Agent Constantine was done examining the body in the garden. Following the distant voices, I found him in the kitchen having tea with Aunt Adele. I paused just outside the doorway to listen. Being sneaky made me feel guilty, but these days I had a good reason. I needed to protect myself. "Your absolute favourite," Aunt Adele was saying fondly. "And you want a dollop of cream too, I assume?" "You know it, Dell," he said. There was a note of light-hearted laughter in his voice that I had not heard before. My heart gave a silly little flip-flop. I told it to calm the fudge down. They seemed to know each other. How odd. I walked in to find she had cut him a generous slice of my very own favourite chocolate fudge cake. "It's Esme's favourite too," Aunt Adele said, beaming when she saw me. He did not look impressed. Maybe knowing it was my favourite even put him off, because he pushed aside his plate and took out a notepad and pen. He absent-mindedly picked a couple of twigs out of his hair. Aunt Adele saw him and chortled. "Did the fairies pelt you? You should have bought them a gift." "Like what?" he said, looking astonished. "Fruit? Nuts? Honey?" Aunt Adele threw back her head and shook with laughter. Then she patted him on his head. "No, dear. Grubs, mealworms, ant eggs. They're fearsome meat-eating little critters. Did none of your friends have fairies in their gardens growing up?" Clearly not. The look on his face made even me laugh. His delusions of fairies being delightful darlings was being shattered. "Just wait until you see the beastly little carnivores chomping their way through—" I paused, seeing the dismay on his face, and added, "Never mind." "Is the body safe out there?" he asked. "Of course it is. They don't eat people, just bugs." This reminder that Lily was out there was sobering. I gave a sigh. Aunt Adele poured me a cup of tea and cut me some cake and started cooking breakfast. Chris Constantine said, "Adele has assured me that the 7 ghosts had nothing to do with the death. She was with them at the time, nor did they witness anything relevant. Nor did they have any motive to attack that poor girl," insisted Aunt Adele. Chris Constantine turned to Aunt Adele, "But I may need to ask questions of them later." I couldn't help but snigger. Good luck with that. He furrowed his brows, but did not respond to my implication that he ought to be afraid of them. He asked me questions in that stiff and serious manner of his. "Did you know the victim? How did you discover the victim? What were you doing out in the garden at that time of morning?" I was both annoyed and relieved at this line of questioning. Annoyed because he was treating me with suspicion. Relieved because I had once been accused of murder before, and I was very thankful he did not seem to know anything about it. I told him about meeting Lily yesterday and who had been with her, and all about the argument that she had had with her ex-boyfriend James, and that after our little confrontation how they had fled, one running after the other. "Her wand broke," I said quietly. "Maybe if it hadn't broken she'd still be alive. She could have defended herself." Realizing this, I felt awful. It wouldn't have broken if she had not been arguing with me. Agent Constantine didn't reassure me that it wasn't my fault. He didn't say anything at all. This made me feel worse. When I told him that I had discovered the body after my cat had tracked some blood into the house, he was sceptical. "I didn't see a cat with you on the train." Ah, so he remembered that, did he? I had begun to think maybe he had not recognised me. "He's not really my cat. Captain Villain is one of the cats that lives out in Kitten Cove." "Those strays?" "They're not strays," I said, offended. "They're cherished by the townsfolk, the ones who have any sense anyway." His eyes narrowed. "Captain Villain?" I felt myself flush with embarrassment. It was like he knew that I had named Captain Villain as a parody of Captain Shield all those years ago. One had been so good at making trouble, and one had been so good at fixing it. My lips twitched. It was funny, really, if you thought about it. He didn't look amused. "How did the cat get inside the castle?" he said. I furrowed my brows thoughtfully. "I don't know. None of the doors and windows were open. Maybe he got in when Aunt Adele was doing some work out in the garden." Aunt Adele shook her head. "I didn't see him, dear." "But he could have," I said stubbornly. She shook her head firmly. "Perhaps you left a window open," he suggested. "Oh no," Aunt Adele and I said together. Aunt Adele had reassured me that she'd locked everything up tightly to put me at ease in a new place last night. "Then how?" he asked bluntly. "Maybe he's a magical cat," I suggested with a small smile. The cats of Kitten Cove often were. He looked doubtful. He had a lot to learn about this town. "How would the cat have known that you were in here?" he asked. "How am I supposed to know?" I said sharply. "Do you really think I murdered a girl that I barely even knew, and then I made up this stupid cat story to try and cover it all up?" "What were you wearing last night?" he asked. Now my cheeks really did go red. "You saw what I was wearing when you arrived," I said huffily, "and for your information, there wasn't a spot of blood on it. I didn't touch her." "Do you have an alibi for the time of the murder? Say between the hours of 9 o'clock last night and dawn this morning." "What alibi would that be?" I snapped. His eyes dropped to my left hand, where a faint band of pale skin was visible on my ring finger. I had left my wedding rings in London, flinging them off in a fit of rage. "No," I said shortly. "The only person around here is Aunt Adele. I saw her before I went to bed. She can vouch for me." "And after that?" "After that, I was trying to get some sleep," I said shortly. I saw him write down the words, "no alibi," in his notepad. "Why have you come back to Brimstone Bay after so long away?" he asked. "I don't see how that is relevant. Why did you arrive so late at night?" "I got a late train. Why? Is that against your sense of propriety?" He didn't comment, merely saying, "Why does no one know that you're in town?" "How do you know that nobody knows that I'm in town?" I said sharply. I saw the slight rise in his eyebrows and I almost groaned out loud. Darn it, the sneak! He had trapped me into saying that. He hadn't really known that I'd come back into town on the down low. Now he did. "Wily coyote," I muttered. "Excuse me? I said you're not just a pretty face after all." He looked annoyed. There were so many things I could have said to explain creeping in under the cover of night. That I enjoyed being a solitary person. That I was an introvert, a writer. But given my new affliction, all of that just sounded highly suspicious. So I said none of it. I didn't want him thinking I was a lonely weirdo who had something to hide. "Are you done with your 50 million questions?" I asked irritably. "Shouldn't you be running off to interview that James guy? Do you know where I might find him?" "How am I supposed to know that?" I demanded hotly. "Do you think I'm harbouring him in here?" He raised an eyebrow. "Are you?" Now he was being deliberately provocative. There had been no reason for him to say that at all, other than being snarky with me. I stood up abruptly. "I'd like you to leave now. I believe I've told you anything helpful that I'm aware of." I was trying very hard not to be rude. Perhaps I imagined it, but I was sure that I saw the corner of his lips twitch, as if this amused him. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to stay a little longer," he said. "Or do you want the body to stay in your garden all day?" I groaned out loud this time, not bothering to hide it. How stupid of me. And I called myself a crime writer. He needed to wait for a crime scene team to arrive. "I assume you won't need me for that. Aunt Adele can keep you company." I swept out of the kitchen like a Westbrim ought to. Shoulders stiff, back straight, chin up. Granny Selma would have been proud. Aunt Adele ruined it by saying, "You go and get yourself back into bed, dear. You look done in. I'll bring you a breakfast tray." as if I was a child. And don't go anywhere, added Chris Constantine. I scowled. Am I a suspect? Did you see the state of her wounds? That poor girl. I could not possibly have done it. You're a witch, he said. You could have done anything. Hi, you've reached the end. Comment the code word Merlin's beard to confuse everyone who hasn't reached this part of the story yet. Thanks for playing along.